Hello and welcome everyone to this special Thursday edition of the Rational Standard. I'm Morné Malan and I'm joined as always, or in this particular case, by the configuration that is Martin van Staden, David Ansara and Zakhele Mthembu. And during this special Easter edition of the Rational Standard, we thought we'd ask a question about some geopolitical matters and related to economic matters. And that is, we see a lot of restlessness in the US. We see tariff policies around just about everybody. And whilst at the local end, where on the domestic side, we're also seeing a government that's either completely oblivious to the facts on the ground or is actually acting in malice. And that's the question we're trying to answer today on Rational Standard. Is it stupidity? Is it malice? Or is it just plain 4D chess that we can't keep up with? And I think probably the best place to start here is our resident political scientist, David Ansara. What do you think? Let's start with the announcement of our new special envoy to the US. In light of all of the various tensions between South Africa and the US, we've decided to put a crack team together to see if we can allay the fears. And the leader of that team is Mcebisi Jonas, who, if you haven't seen yet, there are some videos on social media that show why he might not be the most diplomatic person to be sending in this regard. But David, what do you think?
Yeah, and Mcebisi Jonas, someone who has a lot of credibility in South Africa, he very famously turned down a massive bribe of something like, I think it was either 60 million rand or 600 million rand from the Guptas. So he clearly doesn't need the money. So he was kind of held up as something of a hero during the state capture period, and was also kind of sidelined by Zuma and his coterie when he didn't play ball. But I think what's telling here is, I think the local political establishment probably thinks, this is somebody who would be an ideal candidate to send to the United States. But actually, I think it reveals that perhaps people in the United States themselves don't really care too much about our domestic affairs and the profile of personalities. They care really about the policies. And certainly what was unearthed on that webinar was not a good start for Mr. Jonas. And similar to the webinar that featured the previous ambassador, Ebrahim Rasool, which very quickly resulted in his classification as persona non grata. And a source of mine yesterday told me that from the time that those comments of Rasool's were publicly known to the time when the knock on his ambassadorial door came with a letter saying that he's been classified as a PNG, a persona non grata, was about an hour and 40 minutes. So from the moment when the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, decided that he's withdrawing the diplomatic status of South Africa's ambassador, going through all of the Senate committees and various portfolios, I don't think it was deliberated on. It was more just notifying. But that had a very clean passage. And I think that shows you the fragility of the relationship. And I also think that this is something that is one of the only, if not the only, bipartisan matter in the United States that unites a very divided political establishment, which is that South Africa is out of line. The Democrats don't like that South Africa was cozying up to the Russians, and the Republicans don't like that South Africa was having warm relations with Iran and China and others. So South Africa has managed to spectacularly fumble its foreign relations with the United States. But I guess a question that we should be asking is this intentional? Is this just bungling on the behalf of South Africa's foreign affairs team? And I think we were talking offline before the recording started, and it looks as if this relationship is being deliberately sabotaged. Whether or not the people conducting our foreign affairs realize and understand the costs potentially involved in that. I mean, even Rasool himself, in a previous engagement, was saying, look, China and the United States are the two biggest trade partners, but we end up sending a lot of minerals to the People's Republic of China, but all of the beneficiated manufactured goods, that goes to the United States. So even he understood the extent of the trade relationship. And yeah, so is the ideological posturing eclipsing the material interests of South Africa, or is there something else going on there?
Yeah, and I suppose it's not necessarily a either or situation. It could be malicious, and they could be very stupid for being so malicious. So I guess it could always be both. But yeah, I think
have you heard of Hanlon's razor, which is don't ascribe to malice what can be easily explained with stupidity.
yeah.
Not sure if that's if Hanlon's razor is applying here in this context.
Well, the thing is, when it becomes a pattern, then at what point does one say this seems to be deliberate? And I think the question is, Martin, what would we hope to gain? Is there some sort of strategy by alienating the US? Because it does seem like we are trying to alienate the US either deliberately or stupidly. But yeah, I think David alluded to it there. We had just had a ambassador declared persona non grata and removed from the US for calling, I think it was Trump, a white supremacist, for saying he wants to spread supremacy throughout the world. And we decided to follow that up with Mcebisi Jonas, who, during a webinar, I'm not entirely sure what all the epithets were, but they definitely included that he was a homophobe, that he was a racist, that is not necessarily somebody we'd like to work with. So, I mean, is it really the case that we're trying to burn the bridges? We'll burn that bridge when we get there, or is it the case that there just is no depth? The reason we sent a very bad person is because there aren't any good ones.
No, but I mean that's exactly the point. There are better ones. Whether they're good is a separate question. But like for me, what is screamingly obvious is that if the president's agenda is to repair the relationship of the United States, then you send Tony Leon to the United States. There you go. Like that is what you do. You send John Steenhuisen to the United States. You send Solly Malatsi to the United States. You send Peter Groenewald to the United States. I mean, it's not a terribly long list, but it's at least a page of people that you can just kind of close your eyes and just put your finger wherever, and there you go. You have an envoy who will probably do not a terrible job. I don't know if so I mean there's two separate questions here. If you send the best envoy that you can imagine, if Elon Musk was a South African who lived here and we pick him as our special envoy to go to the US, do the Americans care, or are they going to say, listen, yeah, it's nice meeting you for some coffee, but your policies domestically haven't changed, so nothing really has happened here? Because I think ultimately whoever we send is going to tell the same old story about, yeah, we have a complicated history and blah and blah and blah and blah. It's like we're not going to change anything. So that's a separate question. But I think the choice of Jonas, and I must say that I actually like Jonas. David alluded to this earlier, that he's kind of a man of some integrity. I quoted him very favorably in my book, The Constitution and the Rule of Law. So I think he's a pretty decent guy. And someone said yesterday at a private dinner that when Jonas was saying these things, it was during COVID, it was very normal, really, to describe Donald Trump as a racist and a homophobe. So it's not like it's this kind of conspiracy of these Trump haters. It's like, well, your average politico at that time believed that Donald Trump was a racist and a homophobe. And I myself have said things about Donald Trump that would also make me unsuited to be South Africa's envoy to the United States. But that's the point. I mean, have some self-consciousness, like be aware of the fact that Donald Trump is now, in fact, the president of the United States again. And if the agenda is to repair the relationship, pick someone with who they can get along. And clearly the ANC didn't do that with this pick. And I don't think any incompetence features here. I do not think that the ANC is that stupid. I mean, they're very bad at governance. They're very bad at kind of keeping their hands out of the cookie jar. But I've always thought that on base politics, they're pretty good, pretty clever. And this is politics. So they chose Jonas, and I promise you, they knew. Certainly, he knew, so he could have told them. But I'm sure his colleagues in the ANC knew that he had said some disparaging things about Donald Trump. So I definitely put my hat in the ring of this being deliberate sabotage. Now, to what end, you asked, Morné? That's a more difficult question. At the same dinner last night, a few people were saying that almost all of the rest of Africa is kind of conceding. Lesotho, Zimbabwe, all of them have kind of gone to the Americans and said, okay, let's kind of figure this out. And kind of the tariff relief already happened or is kind of on the agenda for them. But South Africa and I think the other African state is Algeria, and I'm assuming the Sahel countries also, but they didn't come up. They are not. We are kind of the holdouts, and that kind of that's very unfortunate, I would say. People construe this as an American attack on our sovereignty, but all the Americans have said are among the things that the FMF, the IRR, many others have said for many years from South Africa. It's not, these are just good ideas. Scrap BEE, get rid of race laws, respect private property rights. The foreign policy things are a bit more tricky, but Ireland can carry on with the ICJ case. There's no reason that we have to do it. So these are not difficult things. But we're still a holdout. We're not like Colombia, kind of saying, okay, let's figure this out. So why? I don't know. I don't know if the ANC wants to go down in history as the final holdouts, the bettereinders, who really gave it to Donald Trump, and history books are gonna talk about them and ballads are gonna sing about them. I don't know if this is what they have in mind, but I really hope not. I think that some sense prevails sooner rather than later. Because really each time that this happens, I worry that the Americans see it's not just that we're not reforming and that we're ignoring them. I worry that the Americans are seeing these as deliberate insults, which they are. Laila Khalid Drive, Ebrahim Rasool, Mcebisi Jonas. At what point are we going to stop spitting in their faces? That's what I worry about. And every time that happens, I fear that we edge closer to something like sanctions. I think it's still quite unlikely, but like real sanctions on the country and not just on targeted to politicians. So that's my worry. And that I hope this malice is exposed and that somehow Parliament or whatever can drag us away from that approach that we've adopted.
Yeah, and it's a weird thing where I think it's sort of like they're walking around with a sort of David Ansara, David syndrome, where they think that they're going to be David and they're going to defeat Goliath. But I think that the proportions here are just, I mean, they're even more ridiculous than the initial story. There's just no way. There isn't a slingshot big enough for us to take down the US, but for some reason we do seem to have this notion that we'll really show them, and that everyone else will see us to be showing them, that we'll sort of become this leader in the rest of the world, and that everyone will just fall behind us. But the fact is that just doesn't happen. Real politics enters in fairly quickly, and everybody starts falling in line because it's just the rational thing to do. And seeing as this is the rational standard, we tend to support that. But yeah, Zakes, two things that Martin mentioned. The one was, what is it that the US would hope to see from us? He mentioned the BEE policies, either giving a sort of carve out for US companies or otherwise scrapping them entirely. EWC's been in the news the whole time. I suppose trade is also a fairly big issue. We do have quite a few trade barriers erected against the US. What is it that the US would like to hear from us? So what is it that we should be saying if we wish to placate them? And then the second question is just, what is it that we'd like to get, and what's sort of motivating our resistance to actually giving that to them? Is it just purely ideological matters, or do we actually sort of see a shift in the geopolitics of the world? Are we trying to cozy up to China? Are we trying to make BRICS superpower and trying to ingratiate ourselves there? And if we are, is that a good idea? Is it good for us? Is it smart for us to actually pursue that path? I mean, you and I spoke earlier this week just about the state of the Chinese economy. And my personal opinion is it's not nearly as strong as people tend to think. It's big because they have billions of people, but it's actually fairly weak, and it's actually fairly hollow when you drill down to it. But yeah, just those two questions. What is it that we should be saying to the US if we wish to placate them? And what's motivating us, or what's causing us not to say those things, or not to actually give in to those requests?
I think, in as much as what Martin said about, domestic policy reform, which in and of itself, right, the idea that a foreign country can tell you what to do is incredibly wrong. I will never support it, irrespective if there were a bunch of people voting for socialism in a particular jurisdiction. And I know that socialism should not exist. And this is where me and Martin disagree, because he's a proponent of even sending military powers there. I'm like, no, there's just no basis to tell free people how to live their lives. It really violates everything that we believe in. So the thought of that really is absurd to me, but it is truly not the reason why we are not in the US's good graces. Because remember, this is Donald Trump's second time around. We had BE, we had EWC as a constitutional amendment on our legislation. Like, all these policies domestically that are supposedly the reason for them being mad at us have been here for a while. It is only when we took Israel to the ICJ that we drew their ire. That is what they want from us. They want a concession. They want some form, I don't know, something of saying, hey, we're sorry, we should not have done that. Because that's pretty much the case, proved that Israel was committing genocide, or at the very least made a strong case of it internationally in an institution that was established by the United States itself. So I don't think they are big fans of that. And as we know, seemingly Israel gets to do whatever it wants in, US policy. Really want funding for more weapons, yes, whilst we're slashing funding for everything domestically, we'll increase funding for military aid to Israel. And I think that is primarily the reason, the ICJ case. And I think that what will placate them really is trying to get someone who will tell them, yo, like that we should not have done that. I think that is what they want. And I don't think that the ANC ideologically is committed to making that concession, because there is a deep rooted belief within the ANC's base, right, that they are in solidarity with Palestinians and the Palestinian struggle and everything like that. So to them, right, to me, of course, rationally, you don't do that. You don't draw the ire of the biggest power in the world by involving yourself with an ally that is literally thousands of kilometers away from you. You just don't do that. But within the ANC, there are people who believe that you should do that. And if you were to, strongman their position, you would understand why, right? These are people ideologically who come from a culture that says that every person that, is in struggle across the world is in struggle. You have to be in solidarity with them. And then it goes back to their history of receiving donations and, their leaders living quite comfortable lives all across the world from people who had, prospered in their struggles in the past. So there is a real history there. And I think a lot of people, and I see this conspiracy that, the Iranians, and we're cozying up to the Iranians and everything like that. I'm like, man, Israel does not like Iran. And like the fact that we also don't hate Iran as much as Israel does is a problem to them, of course, because Israel seemingly wants everyone to just fall in line with everyone who's their enemy, right? That is what, to me, that is what this is premised on. The Israel issue, the ICJ case, and the ANC has to concede on that if they really want to have a prosperous relationship with the US, because I think that would be the starting point to show them that, okay, we are willing to play ball in some way. And yeah, I don't think that they at the very least for now are understanding that.
Okay. Well, let's put the actual opinion regarding Israel to the side for now, regardless of what one feels about that struggle. What's your opinion on what the ANC should do then, or what the government should do then? Because you mentioned two things there. The one thing was sovereignty, and I think that's legitimate. Although I think there's a difference between the sovereignty of free people and the sovereignty of a government to not to act in defiance of the will of the people that they govern. So sovereignty is the one thing, but the other thing is, let's say regardless, let's say you do buy the version of events that the ANC has portrayed. Is it something that we have to stick to? Is it something that they should be willing to buck on? How much? How many points of GDP should we be willing to give up in order to keep the fight for freedom in Palestine going?
Firstly, the sovereignty issue. Governments are elected by free people. Like, if we just take the entire premise of state construction into and then the entire basis for the state falls away, right? And I'm happy for that. We can go the anarchist route, Martin. We can definitely go that route. But if we are going to admit to the premise of the state existing, then we have to admit that the state is given credence by the people who vote for it, irrespective of like whether you agree with their decisions or not. And this is something that is extremely important to me, primarily because I'm a huge opponent of US foreign policy, especially in states that it disagrees with. So yeah, there is that. And then you said that, irrespective of the opinion about the Israel issue, like I think like what we're missing is that it stopped being an opinion when it was taken to the ICJ. It became a matter of international law. It became a matter of a ruling that says Israel, a state, violated. Like, so now it's no longer what I think or what anyone else thinks. It's a matter of what an institution that was established by the United States thinks the state of Israel did. But then the ANC, right? Man, I'm by the way, irrespective of what I think of Israel and like the state itself, I disagree with the ANC doing that, because I don't think that it is in our interest, in our self-interest, to be involving ourselves with the Palestinian struggle, right? Like, and there may be a section, hopefully, of the ANC, and I know there's a section of the South African population in general, right, that like is like, man, we don't care really, and those who do care don't care to the extent that they would be willing to jeopardize their livelihood and their quality of life to pretty much be in solidarity with Palestine. So yeah, like I think the ANC has to realize that, and the best way for them to realize that would be them just losing more and more of the vote. That's the only recourse that we have, really, is if people just stop voting for the ANC, because if they vote for the ANC, then like we are stuck with them. And that is frustrating, because they are jeopardizing, like they're self-sabotaging and for no reason, right? Because like if you look at what are we getting, right? So what are we getting from taking Israel to the ICJ, from doing all these things? What is the tangible benefit for the average South African citizen outside of ANC members feeling good about themselves and like having to write in their memoirs 10 years from now that they were involved in the deliberation? Like, really, we benefit nothing. We benefit nothing. So
sort of virtue signaling,
precisely.
Condition.
And like, but the implications of it are that now we aren't liked by our second biggest trading partner, and we are like literally just like skating on the edge of them going, you know what, screw these ones. But I think that we have some leverage, of course, with the US, who are one of the few economies that they can seemingly have a relationship with and access to other economies in the African jurisdiction. There are only two allies, I think, in Africa, like Namibia and Uganda, may be mistaken, but like real true allies that have been strong with them. And I don't think they have the capabilities, at least, of facilitating some of the things that the US would want from their economy. So, there is some leverage there. Maybe in the ANC they're considering that. I doubt it. I doubt it. I doubt it. And then there was the second question, which is I think is much more important, which touched on like what like the Chinese economy, what are they trying to do? Like what is their ideological motivation? I really don't know. I think that is the $1 million question, which makes me really not attribute malice so much so, because when I attribute malice to it, I have to come up with a reason behind said malice, right? Unless it's just like destruction for its own sake. But like, yeah, it is, you know, I wouldn't say it's full incompetence too. It's like ideologically motivated incompetence. Like they're just maybe truly believe in these damn things that they really should not, you know, believe in. At least damn in the sense of acting on them when you're responsible for millions of people. Of course, you can believe that, you know, the Israeli state is doing something horrible, which is, of course, a valid opinion to have. But when you start involving other people's lives, right, in the said belief, then it becomes a problem when the implications are that our economy, which is already on the doldrums, will suffer even more. So, yeah. The Chinese are not the answer. We spoke, Morné, you know, like they are a paper tiger in the truest sense.
Well, yeah, and I suppose there's plenty of people doing plenty of horrible things around the world. And I mean, at the end of the day, if you want to cut yourself off from every country that's doing bad things, then you're going to get very isolated very quickly, including China, where, I mean, there is, of course, a lot of bad things happening in China, particularly with regard to their minority populations. But sorry, David, you've actually been keen to get into the conversation for quite some time.
Yeah, well, all I would say is the locus of control is with the foreign policy establishment in South Africa. Like, we are operating in a global environment. We need to choose our actions and our responses. And yeah, you know, Zakes makes this argument that, oh, we need to respect the sovereignty of other countries, but there is a certain arrangement that the United States has with Israel, like it or not. And if you take Israel to the ICJ, it's not unreasonable to think that the US is going to have something to say about that and is going to use the leverage at its disposal to put pressure on us. So, you know, these are entirely self-inflicted wounds, I would say. And yeah, look, I don't think the Israel matter is the only issue. I think the US takes it very seriously, but I think expropriation risk, I think, is very serious. There are 600 companies, US companies, operating in South Africa. They have an interest in long-term security of tenure and certainty over their property rights and their investments. There's race-based laws, 142 of them, as Martin has very studiously revealed to the public in his research for the Race Law Index. That has not gone unnoticed in the US. There's a huge tilt away from DEI type policies, and BE is kind of lumped in with those. And yeah, I mean, on the international front as well, if you study that executive order of 6th of February, you'll see that there's also mention of providing nuclear assistance, collaboration around research. I don't know how substantiated those claims are, but that's a pretty serious claim to be putting on an executive order. This is between South Africa and Iran, allegedly. And then, of course, there are alleged links, financial links between the ANC and Tehran as well. So it's not just that they're, you know, kind of cozying up or sending positive Christmas cards, not like we send the Christmas cards, but you know, it's there are question marks around where did the ANC get its funding from in the run-up to various election campaigns. So yeah, so you know, these are all adding up, not looking good for the ANC.
Morné,
I'll give you a chance now. I just want to get back to Martin. And cool. I see there's a comment here as well. And it ends off by saying, you know, South Africa's not entitled to anything. And I mean, that's just manifestly true. We aren't entitled to anything. And I mean, just linking up to what David said.
Not even freedom, not even freedom, not even the liberty to mess up.
Well, I mean, you're entitled to it, but there will be consequences. And
but it's a relationship, Zakes. So the relationship has two parties, and if the one party is not happy with the other party, then That's going to strain the relation.
Cool. This is a tangent. I still have, an answer for what you proposed, because I think it just ignores the sequence of events. Every policy existed prior to us taking Israel to the ICJ. That is the turning point. Everything else is semantics. That is the turning point. Israel is the turning point. And I do agree with you, David, that, of course, Israel has a relationship with the United States, and this is something, that's just why I disagree with the ICJ case. But, we really are playing a semantic game by saying that it is anything else but that, because it is that.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
there's a slight difference between it being the key thing and it simply being the straw that breaks the camel's back. So I agree with the point that is the litigation against Israel is the thing that is primarily motivating the American response. I think that's clear. But the other things are relevant. They all built up to this. And the point that I always make is that South Africa's post-apartheid history, for some reason, and I mean, Jake's alluded to the reason for this earlier, and he's right, but has been a series of kind of happy to take American money, but then on the other side, kind of spitting in America's face whenever the opportunity arises. And it's like, yeah, I mean, Zakes and I have very severe kind of foreign policy differences, but what I think we do agree on is that America kind of does do some things around the world that aren't always great. I mean, it's the United States supported the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. I mean, kind of a disgusting kind of blight on its record. Unforgivable to some degree. But the reality here is, and this is a point that I've often conceded to liberals and libertarians who kind of lean a little bit more towards Russia, lean a little bit more towards Palestine, is that, yes, I think that neutrality in that context makes sense for South Africa. My preference is a outright pro-Western kind of posture, but I am happy to compromise on substantive and true neutrality, non-alignment, which is something the ANC has always claimed for South Africa and has consistently just lied about. It is not, David, you often make this point, it is not the Indian version of non-alignment, where India maintains relatively good relationships with all sides of conflicts. And I think there is a version of South Africa where we actually have good relationships with Israel and with Palestine, with Ukraine and with Russia. Tough, very tough. Like I said, I think that there's a binary here that's much easier, but it's possible. If the Indians can do it, and various other countries can do it, then certainly we can do it. So yeah, I think Zakes is right to the degree that the ICJ case is the key thing that has motivated the American response. But I think that it does have to be seen in a far broader context. And I think it's easy I think there is also a version of this where the ANC can save face, where it can agree with Ireland, with Malaysia, I think, and there's I think Colombia, and say that South Africa is stepping back from the case. It's still committed to kind of the vibes of the case, but the other kind of country takes over and leads the fight in The Hague. I think there is a version of that allows the ANC to save face, because the reality is South Africans don't vote on foreign policy. The ANC did not lose or get votes based on its foreign policy posture, so that it doesn't harm the ANC its hegemony in South Africa. But I guess it does harm it somewhat ideologically, which Zeke is completely right about. This is ideological, and that's where I would say this is where there is no incompetence here. I think that everything happening here is very deliberate, politically deliberate, very well thought out. But even though it's going to have costs, they don't necessarily care. The ideological considerations to them outweigh the practical costs. And I have sympathy as an ideologue for freedom. I have sympathy for that kind of general perspective. But yeah, as an ideologue, I understand how tough it might be for the ANC to actually abandon these things. Other countries have now succeeded. They have conceded. So the ANC just needs to come to the party.
Yes, well, Martin, actually, I just want to pick up on that. And Zakes, you can come in right after Martin. But I'm not aware of similar measures being taken against these other countries that also support the case. If that really is what's motivating the US, and I don't want to get too dug in on psychoanalyzing the US the whole time, but if that is the motivating or the primary motivating factor here, why has, for some reason, these other countries, why have they managed to escape the dreaded the dread of the US and of Donald Trump, as opposed to South Africa? Doesn't that point towards the fact that this is a larger issue? And Martin, you did already mention this, but there has been just this pattern of disrespecting the US for decades now. And this despite the fact, ironically, people have this picture in their minds that of the fact that the ANC was supported by Russia and the apartheid government was supported by the US. That's despite the fact that the US actually took the lead on sanctions under apartheid, and that's almost certainly the primary driver that ended apartheid in those days. But there has been since then we've not been very kind to them. I don't want to overblow it, but certainly we haven't treated them with the requisite appreciation and an appreciation of their enormous influence. But yeah, just on that, there are those other parties. Why, if that's the catalyst, why have they managed to escape judgment?
Yeah, no, that's exactly the point. In that, again, I agree that out of all the things that have happened, this is the most egregious. This is the thing that, from the American perspective, this is the thing that pushed us over that line that the Americans had in their mind. But it is part of a broader context, and that's exactly why there's various countries that kind of are involved in that case. I think Spain is also in there somewhere as being relatively far left on some of these questions. Certainly Ireland, certainly Malaysia, but I think if you take away one or the other, we have the potential to come back across the line. So if BE is completely reformed, if race law is completely done away with, if EWC is done away with, I think that there is potential for the Americans to say, well, cool, we'll go easier on you. I think that if they undo the ICJ case, the Americans will respond far more favorably because they see that as bigger. But it is part of this bigger context. And again, it's an ideological motivation. But the kind of example that always comes to my mind is Venezuela. They've been in trouble since kind of the early 2000s when Hugo Chavez was elected as president there. And in every stolen election that the socialists in Venezuela have rigged so far, South Africa couldn't kind of issue an acknowledgement of the election quickly enough. It waited until the Americans said that this thing has been rigged, and South Africa said that we welcome Nicolas Maduro or Hugo Chavez as another term president of Venezuela. But here's the point: Hugo Chavez and his movement didn't exist during apartheid, so the ANC cannot rely on, well, we got kind of support from Venezuela and so on. So that historical aspect now has fallen away. Sure, there's an ideological agreement, but more than that, and this is why I very kind of deliberately am choosing my words in that we spit in America's face. It is as if we wait for the Americans to take a position on some geopolitical issue, and then if it's kind of reasonably possible, we take the opposite position. And that seems to me to be very deliberate. It would be very much in line with the ANC's character as a revolutionary movement, a mass democratic movement, if it said, hey, that election in Venezuela was stolen and we believe that the democratic view of the Venezuelan people must be respected. That would not be any kind of skin off their noses as far as their credentials go. But they insist on geopolitical issues, on being on the opposite side of the United States, and that I think is something the Americans probably knew, but increasingly is starting to annoy them and piss them off a little bit, because it's exclusively ideologically motivated, and there's some grievance, I mean, geez, is it as tangible as hate for the United States, in the ANC in particular? One of the primary anti-colonial forces of the previous century, the ANC, despises them. It's something to behold.
David, you look like you're lining up to get something in
Yeah,
here.
well, if I was just, whilst we were talking, I was just doing some background reading on the US-Taiwan relationship. So on this State Department website, they say, as a leading democracy and technological powerhouse, Taiwan is a key US partner in the Indo-Pacific. Though the United States does not have diplomatic relations with Taiwan, we have a robust, unofficial relationship. The United States and Taiwan share similar values, deep commercial and economic links, and strong people-to-people ties, which form the bedrock of our friendship and serve as the impetus for expanding US engagement with Taiwan. And then it goes on to kind of list the history. And I just think that that's a really interesting example that officially the United States recognizes the one China policy, has very warm relations, has a lot in common with Taiwan, and Taiwan has very favorable attitudes towards the United States. And yet they're going out of their way not to antagonize China on this, the PRC, on this particular issue. Like they want to maintain this sort of official indifference. And they do not want to see a change to the status quo. And they have the Taiwan Relations Act and the joint communiques and the 6 assurances and all this stuff. And then they say, we oppose any unilateral changes to the status quo from either side. So I think, when we're dealing with international relations, we're actually dealing with a messy and imperfect world, right? Like, ideally, I'm sure many Americans would like to see Taiwan unilaterally declaring independence, and they would support that. But that would trigger a massive conflagration in the Pacific that would not end very well for the people of Taiwan or other people. So you have to be strategic. And, I don't think that this is a case of like, oh, we were just South Africa, this kind of small isolated country that was merrily going along its way. And then suddenly the United States started pointing accusatory fingers at us and meddling with our sovereignty. We brought a lot of these things on ourselves. So, another point that I want to make is it seems that this is ANC foreign policy, not the interests of ordinary South Africans. And the ANC has its history and its associations and its friendships. But, I think this is an important point that Tony Leon made on an interview recently, which is when he was appointed the ambassador to Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay by Jacob Zuma, Zuma specifically said to him, I want the rest of the world to know that South Africa is not just ANC. It's actually that there are a variety of voices and interests in South Africa and that they're represented on the global stage. But now it seems like the attitude is, well, the foreign minister is an ANC guy, so therefore he gets to solely determine what South Africa's foreign policy is. And likewise with the president, it's my prerogative, he reminds us constantly. But need we remind him that it's a unity government? We've been pretty skeptical of the GNU, but the fact remains that it is a unity government. It has a variety of different interests represented there, and foreign policy should reflect that composite interest. But it seems like actually the opposite has in fact happened. We've moved away from Zuma's conception of foreign policy towards a hardline, doctrinaire, ANC-only foreign policy, which I think is really damaging to the interests of ordinary South Africans.
Oh, how we long for the years of Zuma. I mean, I say that jokingly, but there's almost no metric according to which we weren't better off under Zuma than we are right now, whether you're looking at GDP per capita, whether you're looking at unemployment, whether
it certainly wasn't pushing expropriation legislation through, and I'm sure he gave some kind of support to NHI, but I mean, he was not the one who got the NHI Act signed. That was his successor. So yeah, I mean, all he wanted was just a fire pool and to be left alone in Nkandla, and we had to make life so difficult for him.
Yeah, that seems like a fair deal to me. Let's just allocate X number of billions for a political elite, provided that they just leave us alone and allow us to work on our own. But Zakes, you've been silenced. You've been quiet for some time. Do you have anything else to add? Let's actually talk about this. What David raised about the GNU. And to what extent, I mean, I guess there hasn't really been much compromise in any event, but this does seem to be the one thing about which the ANC won't even gesture towards taking in external opinions. Foreign relations seems to be the one thing where they say, no, this is not subject to sufficient consensus. This is not subject to input from any other party. Whereas they at least, rhetorically tend to give a nod towards those sorts of things when it comes to all kinds of other policies, or towards the budget and so forth. So, I mean, should the GNU broadly have an influence on foreign policy? And yeah, I mean, would you like to see it?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it should, right? Like to David's point about the point that Jacob Zuma's made, and also mentioning how like the Americans adopt the Chinese and Taiwanese situation, right? Which is pretty ingenious on their part, and it is something that no president has even, we could do that with the Israel, like we could really do that, like have no diplomatic relationships, and just like write what David read as a feel-good statement, to make the PLO or whoever it is happy there. But we aren't doing that. And I think the GNU should really try and leverage, particularly its influence on like foreign policy even more, because it will affect our domestic policy at some point, right? If things do not change, if the ANC keeps on, governing, at least running the foreign policy department and pretty much producing foreign policy like it is still a majority party, then it will affect us here domestically. So really, it is something that they should be pushing way more for, especially now that there is, Mr. Trump as the president of the United States. Really, it should have been a central negotiating, pillar, because I don't think the ANC, when you hear members of the ANC talk within, especially about, Donald Trump and US relations, you always hear this, thinking that they are the ones, as you said, who dictate this policy, because they talk about we have good relationships with some, but like, it isn't a we as as if 50% of the voting electorate gave you that power to say we, you don't have that power anymore. But given the configuration, and this is where I will concede on people who are critical, right, of the GNU, given that the GNU exists and like there's a cabinet that has led by an ANC president, like they have that power, like unless there's a vote of no confidence and things like that. And like, hopefully maybe that will be a consideration should, the foreign policy just be so horrible. Like with this Mcebisi Jonas thing, I agree with Martin, right? Like you just play politics, you get Tony Leon to be ambassador, done. He becomes it's done. It really would not be a major issue. But the fact that they are unwilling to concede on that, right, it's frustrating. It's frustrating, and like the GNU should definitely, like that should be their focus. But we have so many problems, so really the focus should be divided equally among the problems. But I think this is going to be an increasingly pressing one, because should the US bring the heat, we will feel it everywhere. So yeah.
Yeah, I suppose the nice thing about being Switzerland is you get to be Switzerland. And the bad thing about getting your policy from East Berlin is that there is now no longer a separate Berlin. It is, and the eastern part was generally not very prosperous. But
what would you guys think of Alan Wendy appointing Tony Leon as the ambassador to the United States on behalf of the Western Cape?
No, I mean I've written a little bit about this before, and I think that given South Africa's formally federal kind of configuration,
Constitution.
that is something that our provinces have to start kind of just doing. I mean, there's nothing in our constitution that actually explicitly gives foreign relations to the national government. You would think that it is there, but it isn't. It's kind of just a constitutional convention, which I defer to. But I think if such, so the Western Cape does have it's part of their economic development department. They have a foreign office type thing that has to do with investment. And I think that this is something that they could actually lean into, but they won't because it's the DA, and the DA doesn't know what it wants to do with the GNU. So it's a nice dream. And I mean, this is where I actually have to take my L. I famously predicted that the GNU wouldn't work, and that's coming true. But one of my other predictions was that, foreign policy, that's kind of, the ANC would be kind of willing to concede on that. They won't do any real policy reform in South Africa, but the foreign policy is easy. They don't lose anything. So they will just kind of leave the ICJ case. I said that on radio. I said that they would probably, what else? They would probably be a little bit more toned down on Ukraine, which, I mean, I think maybe I'm right there. But I underestimated how important foreign policy was to the ANC. They are, one of you said that the ANC, like, actually foreign policy is the one thing that they're not willing to give, even to appear like they're giving an inch. On other things, they kind of do play this kind of game and say that they're all coming together. But on foreign policy, they said no go. So yeah, I have to take my L there, and that to me almost says that the GNU cannot work, because what is one of the defining elements of a state in political theory is that it maintains foreign relations. So it's so key to the very notion of government that you have to be able to kind of have relations influenced by your democratic kind of dispensation with other states. And the ANC has said that our elections will have no influence on how South Africa approaches foreign policy. This is, the ANC owns foreign policy even if it loses the election, and that's something to be concerned about. And then just a final point. As someone who is very kind of set on a kind of pro-liberty, pro-Western foreign affairs, I do tend to reserve judgment, even historically, on states that try to be pragmatic. So when you read history books about the Holocaust and the Second World War, you often see the historians kind of saying, the Indians or this group in or even Ireland, I think, to some degree, and certainly Switzerland, they maintained neutral or even cordial relationships with the Nazis. And of course, I do cringe a little bit at that, but it's understandable to some degree. I mean, hindsight is 2020. You have to kind of, in foreign policy, if you are not clearly pro-West, you have to kind of make some concessions and kind of be pro both. So yeah, I'm very partial to this idea that the kind of approach that David and Zeke spoke about with Taiwan. I mean, that to me seems like a relatively good model that South Africa could utilize, to say that, listen, we're formally neutral. We will not sell weapons to anyone. That we will not kind of choose sides, but we will try and maintain good relationships with both. But yeah, I think we're just as far away from that as we are from taking a pro-Western foreign policy, just because it doesn't seem like the ANC is willing to give an inch on this. And yeah, I mean, I don't know how you solve that. As long as the president is an ANC deployee and he appoints the foreign minister, I don't see how you solve that. You have to have a non-ANC president, and this is one of the kind of ideas, is to for the GNU to work, is pick some small party. I know the IRR will disagree with me on this. They are very against this notion of a small party being able to have outsized power. But I've always been quite partial to it, to say that in a country with deep divisions, with polarization, it might actually be a good idea to pick a tiny party that's relatively inoffensive to everyone. No one really cares about what these people think or what they do, and you put them in the presidency, and you say, cool, you're going to run a non-partisan presidency for us, and we take the other cabinet posts, but you do that. That was kind of one of the things
Are
that I
you
thought
saying that
could help.
Patricia de Lille should be the president of South Africa, Mark?
I think that would be better than what we currently have. Maybe I won't pick Patricia de Lille, but I would say that even she would likely be better on this score than having
I suppose you're angling towards Gayton then, Martin.
Oh God, yeah.
No, I think
he would be better, but yeah.
No, I think let me see someone who would work perfectly would be who's the president of the ACDP. I think he would strike the perfect chord that Martin is looking for. Like that would be relatively inoffensive to most people in South Africa. And
With that,
yeah.
do you think there's a risk that he might force us all to go to church on Sunday?
That might be the only risk. That might be the only risk, and like an increased regulation. I think just all taverns and liquor stores will be closed on Sunday. Already there is a 3 p.m. curfew. Yeah, with him as president, I think we have to concede that much. That Sundays are just no alcohol being sold.
No, but I mean, we've run this experiment, David. You live in Joburg, and I mean, you've been under the leadership of an Al Jamar delegate. So we have had small parties that have governed on behalf of all of the larger parties, and has it worked out swimmingly?
They're really unified.
It's just not. It wasn't the greatest. It wasn't the greatest. I will say I still had water problems. They might have increased. Actually, now I have less water problems. Interestingly enough, right? So it wasn't the greatest.
So, do you guys want to talk about Joburg? Because I have some thoughts on Joburg. I know Martin has a lot of long-standing thoughts on Joburg as well, which are almost too ghastly to share in polite company. But yeah, so one of the drums I've been beating recently is that Joburg needs to be split up, that we actually need to end the COJ as an administrative entity. And I'd be curious to hear what you guys think about it, because, I mean, if you just drive around Joburg, firstly, obviously, you notice that the whole place is falling apart. All the infrastructure is collapsing. I mean, just down the road from our office here, there's a sewer that's been overflowing for like the last 3 or 4 days. And I drive down the hill, and my car literally like slips and slides on all the poo that's coming out of the road. And then on Martin's drive home, what do you see on Loch Avenue there, Martin?
It's being described as the biggest sinkhole in Johannesburg. I think it won that award. It started as a small hole that we just had to kind of slip around. Then it became a big hole, and now we had to go into oncoming traffic. And now the hole has spread into the opposite lane. So at some point, someone's car is going to disappear into it, but that road is going to be closed. And every month and a half, when I go past there, I see some municipal officials standing there staring longingly and forlongingly into the hole and talking to each other before they get back in their truck and drive off. So yeah, not great. And this is the upmarket area. Just remember, this is the upmarket Johannesburg. So
that's parked on way. Yeah, so I drove on Loch Avenue yesterday, and there was somebody coming up the hill, and he was heading straight towards the sinkhole, and I passed him, and he had to slam on brakes to avoid disappearing into the abyss. So yeah, poor him. So look, I mean, I actually go running sometimes with a running club that starts in Park View, and we go running all the way downtown to the old CBD, and that's in quite a state. It's but you can see the remnants of what was once a bustling metropolis. It's still bustling. It's just kind of looking a little bit worse for wear. There's a lot of entrepreneurialism. There's a lot of activity there, people getting on with their lives, but you also can't help but notice that there are a lot of abandoned buildings, a lot of buildings that appear to be hijacked and not very well maintained. And you can really see the consequences of capital flight. It's kind of like a law of nature, or it's like entropy. It's if you don't invest new capital into these places, then they invariably suffer from a kind of an entropy, and they start to go backwards. And when I'm running back from there, then you see off on the horizon, all the way far away, the glistening steel and glass of Rosebank and Sandton. And you really get a sense when you look out of from the balcony here at Northwards of the vast scale of the city of Joburg. And I mean, we only look at the northern part, and that's huge enough. So Midrand, Alexandra, Sandton, the parks, these are all very distinct areas with their own unique problems and characteristics. And I think it's fair to say that the city of Joburg is not really serving the interests of ordinary Joburgers. And I like to play a little game with people whenever I talk about this. I ask them who the mayor of Johannesburg is. And after some kind of stutters and stammers, they eventually confess that they don't know who he is, because he's not really a visible figure. His name's Dada Marero. And he is an unscrupulously honest politician. I'll give him that, because when he became mayor, he said, don't expect anything to change, and I'm not going to fix anything. And he was true to his word, and I appreciate his honesty, but now I'd also like to not pay my rates and taxes anymore. So, but there are problems that need to be fixed. Potholes in roads and leaky pipes and storm drains that are blocked. It's not clear to me that it is the city of Johannesburg that needs to be responsible for these functions. And in fact, on my way to the office today, I was stopping for a cup of coffee, and just outside the coffee shop, there was a van there, and they were busy filling a big hole just outside on the street there. And this was sponsored by an insurance company, a well-known medical insurance company. And so I got chatting to the guys who were kind of pouring the hot asphalt onto the road. Yeah, and they told me that they have about 9 units. And actually on the back of their van, you can see that the city of Joburg, the worker was explaining to me, the city of Joburg and the JRA, they sponsor this. And then he corrected himself and said, no, actually they don't give us any money, but they have allowed us to do this. Yeah. I thought, that's very gracious of them to allow you to solve the problem that you are charging ratepayers for. But anyway,
technically the mayor did promise not to fix anything, so they are sort of going against his word there.
Well, yeah, I mean, if the mayor said the city of Joburg is not going to be responsible for filling potholes, but I'm going to delegate that responsibility and allow residents to fund those initiatives themselves, and in lieu of paying the central authority, then I'd be quite happy with that. And so I think there are a lot of these grassroots initiatives that are taking place, like the example I just described. Also in my area, there's a security company that's now maintaining the verges. So you see it's called the Green Team, and their slogan is maintaining lawns and order. And they're shoveling dirt out of the gutters and trimming the grass and what have you. And all of these things are things that need to be done, and which is important for the beauty and the maintenance of a suburb. But I think they're doing that on a kind of voluntary basis. But so I guess the question is, how do you sort of channel some of that activity into something more sustainable and scalable?
Yeah, and I think that part of that is Zakes, and then Martin, I know you're going to have a lot on this as well. But Zakes, I mean, well, maybe first give us your impression of Joburg. I've got the best solution to the problems of Joburg, and that's not to live in Joburg. But,
yeah.
But
and like,
the second thing is just I mean, one of the big calls is always for decentralization, but if the local authorities are in such a state, is that a solution, or is it maybe the case that when we talk about decentralization, it should be decentralization towards not just a lower form of government, but to something outside of the government?
Yeah, like actually, I think later point is, I think that should be the ultimate solution, decentralization towards something that is outside of the government, because that will be really a long-term, permanent solution. Because yeah, with the state currently, right, particularly in municipalities like Johannesburg, or I think any major municipality across the country, is that you have, certain residents in those municipalities who, for a variety of factors, are unable to pay rates. So you have like a system whereby people are sponsoring the rates of other people, right? As I said, there are a variety of reasons for this, and as such, politically, the motivation to decentralize, particularly revenue collection and distribution in a municipality as big as Johannesburg, I don't think it will be super easy to get. Why I vote for something that is totally outside of the states. And the problem with that, though, is that you end up spending double, right? You end up paying rates that you really do not benefit from, whilst also spending money on doing this out of state solution, which has been the case in South Africa for, I think, the longest of time. So it is an interesting, it's an interesting thing to think about. I think personally the out of state solution is more permanent, that's why I like the campaign for home rule, and the principles in there. Just it is good permanently. I personally want particularly communities that I come from to just be more involved in the actual running of said communities and understanding what it takes to fill a pothole, build roads, and the resources and organizations and all of those things. I think a society benefits when more and more communities are aware of the things that are involved in that, because then it means that there would be greater political participation and everything like that. So yeah, I vote for a much more out of state solution. And as for the state of Josie, man, I love the city. I don't think there's a place I love more than this one. I love everything about it. But to David's point, I have seen the consequences of capital flights, particularly because I'm well versed with the CBD, where you see that there used to be a whole lot of economic activity here, and then as when I'm in the office and I'm looking to the north, you see where it has moved to relatively, like it just moved further north, and you see the consequences of that happening. And yeah, it is not great. It is not great. So I love the city, but I don't like its administration. I have dealt with more water problems now living in a relatively upmarket area of Johannesburg than I used to when I was in Soweto, which is wild to me.
Wow.
Which is wild. But although to the credit, Soweto, where I used to live, at least has experienced much more water problems too. So I think it's a general wider problem of the water infrastructure. Oh no, I'm saying, yeah, to his credit, everything got worse everywhere, so they did not just specifically choose, to make it worse for me. Yeah, it all just went down in an equal measure.
Yeah, just addressing the conspiracy theories. Yeah, sorry, Rod.
Yeah, the thing that might surprise some people is that the Joburg municipality is actually one of the smaller municipalities in the country. So Tshwane, Pretoria, is about 3 times as large as Joburg. Obviously, it's not as economically important or as populated. And the Cape Town municipality is also larger, kind of territory-wise, as the Joburg municipality. So it's a transcendent problem, and the kind of reason we kind of speak about Johannesburg in particular is because it shows what that means in practice when things go disastrously wrong. So it must be seen as kind of the canary in the coal mine. And I know lots of people think, oh, but Cape Town is kind of this pinnacle example of good governance. And this is the same error that very well-meaning people made with Eskom, is that, yeah, up until 2007, the best power company on the planet or whatever. And it's like, listen, you are completely missing the point. You are playing with fire. You are playing with social collapse by keeping things centralized in this vain hope that it will always be governed well. So no, I mean, obviously the solution of decentralization is the right one, but and this is what Jake's alluded to. I also and my column today. We're doing this episode on a Thursday, so it's my usual daily friend column, is specifically on this question, and the title of the column is "How many people must die in the name of your being law-abiding?" And that is a response to quite recently someone in Randburg, an Uber bike driver or something, the person in front of him had to brake for a pothole, and he had to swerve out and into oncoming traffic, and he was killed. And this is certainly not the only example of someone losing their lives because of a relatively simple service delivery issue kind of not being dealt with. And I'm over blaming the municipality. Like, I came to this conclusion a few years ago. It's like you're holding these cretins to this unattainable standard of kind of solving problems. They're not going to solve the problem. Stop dreaming about it and solve the problem, because the issue with South Africans, and I mean, I'm as guilty of this as anyone, is that we stand there shaking our fists at the municipality, and something must happen. We're standing around this pothole shaking our fists at the municipality when we should be solving, like, filling the pothole. And Jake is right. I mean, you're going to double pay, but you're either going to double pay or your cousin is going to die driving into the pothole in a month. So, I mean, you have to make this calculation to some degree. You have to swallow your self-righteousness and say, well, yes, the municipality isn't going to come. I'm not going to stop paying them because I don't want to go to prison. So I need to solve the pothole problem myself. That is not a hopeless thing, because, and this is why I like the saying that apparently I think Mandela told to the Volksstaat people, when in the 90s, when the kind of conservative party remnants wanted to establish an Afrikaner Volksstaat. They went to Mandela and they said, please give us this. And he said, sure, show it to me. It's like, I'll give you your Volksstaat, show me where it is. And they were like, well, we don't know. And it's like, listen, you have to create the reality before you can give it political expression. So you have to start with the out-of-state solution. You have to start creating tangible independence and autonomy on the ground, and then later you can. And I love the American local government model. It's wonderful. You have cities. They call themselves cities that are populated by the mayor and his family. It's like 10 people who live in the city. They have their own city council, their own fire department, and it's just these few people. And that's kind of, it differs from state to state, but in general, if a group of people in a municipality think, hey, we want to self-govern, they have to draw up a petition. They have to kind of form a study group that kind of applies their mind to it and does some research, and they take it to the state, and the state says, cool, you've checked the boxes, and now you're your own municipality. That's why when you look at a map of Los Angeles, you think you're going to see, okay, there's Los Angeles, but actually it's like, there's Los Angeles and there's a part of Los Angeles, and you have these little dots of cities and municipalities in between that sometimes have very, very small populations. And the response to this proposal, which came from the Free Market Foundation and specifically Leon Low in the 1980s, 1990s, that South Africa has to adopt a canton system with very tiny kind of municipalities as our main form of government. The response, of course, was, but cross-subsidization, we have rich people and we have poor people, and therefore you have to have it as one. And like, I mean, again, hindsight is 2020, but I read these things and I'm like, how can you be this dumb? How can you be this stupid? I mean, you can provide for cross-subsidization without consolidating the municipalities. You can have the separate municipalities and still say in law, in national law, that there must be a degree of cross-subsidization. We could have had the best of both worlds, and I say that kind of ironically. I think I think cross-subsidization is a terrible idea. But you could have had cross-subsidization. You could have had your taste of socialism while getting the benefits of decentralization. So, I mean, that's a mistake we made in the name of centralization in the 1990s. And we're not going to undo that unless communities, very local communities, start saying, listen, life is going to get very expensive for us now, far more expensive than it was. And we are going to start incrementally solving our problems and establishing a measure of power in our community over our community. And then 5 years, 10 years, then the government will have effectively no choice but to recognize that there is a thing here that must now be recognized. But you're not gonna, you can't leapfrog that process. You have to show the government the animal. Otherwise, we're just dreaming, shaking our fists into the ether, and they laugh at us. The comrades and the cadres are laughing at us.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is just on this question of cost duplication. I mean, we already have special rating areas where you can pay the city an additional tariff, and then they will then administer those funds and let you basically disperse those funds to specific projects like a security camera system or street lighting or something. A lot of businesses and residents have participated in this, and there's been some kind of measure of success. But I think people are rightly indignant to say, well, I'm already paying the core base rates and now I have to pay more. But yeah, so I think the next step that we need to make, and I think you gents have alluded to it, is also about claiming authority, not just paying for things. And I think people in Johannesburg, everybody knows how terrible the service delivery track record is in the city. But I think more people need to start making that mental leap of saying, okay, actually, if we want to see our suburb X being improved, then we actually need to take ownership over that. And you do have a reason to do that. I mean, if your suburb becomes dilapidated or overrun with weeds or litter or whatever, like that's going to impact the value of your home or your ability to conduct business. Like Zakes mentioned, there's been a lot of flight of businesses out of the CBD. So, I do think people should be seeing their interests maybe in a bit more of a longer term way, and actually starting to act accordingly. I mean, I think what's also interesting is when you speak to people, and I'm sure you've all met councillors in the city of Joburg. Councillors get very frustrated because they might be well-meaning and well-intentioned, but their actual powers are very limited. And so most people, when they see the proverbial leaky pipe in their street, they think, well, let me just call the councillor and tell them about this. And, hello, John Smith, my councillor, let's, please fix the leaky pipe. But the councillor, his options are pretty limited. He or she's going to go and nag the Joburg Water or Joburg Road Authority. And the response from those departments is, well, get in line. There's 2,000 other leaky pipes in the city that we're trying to deal with. And so I think that accountability mechanism is broken. And I think residents are right to think that there should be somebody that they can call when there's a problem. But that person doesn't need to be employed by a central authority sitting in Braamfontein. And I mean, there's a News 24 article. If I find it, I'll post it in the comments, of a MS Teams call that took place last year, where the sole item on the agenda was whether councillors should raise their salaries for the year. And bear in mind that a ward councillor position is like a part-time position, and some of these people are earning almost 600,000 rand a year, which is a pretty decent chunk of change. And a lot of them are not really doing anything for that money. They just deployed cadres. And so there was about 150 people on the call, and you can imagine how this went. People leaving their mics on, and there was one guy, apparently some councillor, who had a Kaiser Chiefs hat on, and he was saying, "Yeah, it's the big game on the weekend, and I'm supporting Kaiser." I mean, it just sounded like an absolute circus. And I mean, I think the mayor gets paid fairly generously. I think 2.5 or 3 million rand, something like that. So yeah, nice work if you can get it. And I just think it makes a mockery of the whole local government system. But local government matters, but there are different ways of doing it.
Yeah, and I think that Martin sort of had, I think he's close to the answer as we've gotten so far, and that's basically that you don't ask for permission prior to doing these sorts of things. You do them, and then if they have an issue, you just apologize. But the fact is that the bureaucracy is always going to entangle you. If you're going to wait to go through all of the formal processes and make sure you tick all of the boxes so that you can really do things the right way, then it's just not going to get done. And I do think that this is true at a local level, but it's also true at a national level. I think that a lot of what's holding back the rest of the GNU is the fact that they feel compelled to sort of follow these formal processes. They're not willing to just do things And then if someone has an issue, they say, oh, well, let's talk it out, but I still believe that this is the right thing to do. And I think that in the same way at a local level, people know certain things need to happen, and they even know how it has to happen, but they're sort of stymied by the fact that, they first have to get the sign off from the municipality, or in the case of the GNU, the sign off from the ANC mainly. And I think that until we get to the point where people are willing to say, something needs to happen, government clearly isn't going to do it, or is going to do it poorly if they are going to do it. Let's get someone else to do it. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean we all have to get our hands dirty, but it does mean that somebody outside of the municipality or outside of the government has to be willing to actually take the action and willing to take the blowback. At the end of the day, and we have seen this in some cases, is when these organizations do stand up, quite often you have the local governments taking them to court saying, no, they shouldn't be allowed to clean up. They shouldn't be allowed to fix the water system. They shouldn't be allowed to fix issues with the electricity grid. And at the end of the day, you can only do that for so long. You can only, if you're the government, you can only deny the people these very basic services for so long before they say, we don't care who you are. We don't care who voted for you. We don't care what your position is. We just want water. We just want the potholes to be fixed. We just want to be safe. And we're willing to get anybody willing to do it and able to do it to deliver that service. And it's clear that government hasn't. And even if you do believe that these are typical government functions, at least in that case, you have some motivation on the part of government, because the thing is that government abhors competition. They don't want to compete with anybody with anybody at all. They want to monopolize services. And that's why whenever somebody offers to do something that the government feels is their job, then they'd rather have those things not happen than have them done by somebody else. And it's only once more and more people begin to do those things that that government will actually either be forced to relinquish the funds that they take for supposedly doing those services, or they'll have to actually do the work themselves. But I do think that is the only solution here, is what Martin said, is get it done, or get together and make sure you have people who know how to do it and are willing to do it. And then when trouble arises, I mean, you've got the moral high ground, you're winning this. People want water. People want to be safe. These are very basic things. And it shouldn't be an ideological issue. But we are coming up to the end. So maybe let's... oh, yes. Well, Martin, before...
Yeah, I just want to make 2 points on this, because this is kind of on this topic, something that people tend to worry a lot about. Number one is the law does have your back to some degree. It's not kind of an easy case, but there is something called the doctrine of necessity, age-old doctrine in South African law, in the law of most civilized countries. If you have gone through a process of trying to follow the correct procedures, we use the word the right procedures, and that has not worked, then the law makes allowance for you. The common law makes allowance for you to take unilateral action, and then when you are taken to court or arrested or whatever, you can say, no, but I try to do this the way that they said I must, and still they did nothing, and still my vital interests were being threatened. So that the law is, we're not saying break the law, because the law recognizes that you cannot expect people to do the impossible, and it is impossible to sit in sewage, to sit in darkness. It is not part of how society works. So that's the one thing. The law is on your side. Just, of course, speak to lawyers and kind of have a look at how the doctrine of necessity would apply to your case. The other thing is people get very offended when people like us say you have to get your hands dirty to kind of start doing these things yourself, because for some reason, and maybe individualism has won in a bigger way than I as an individualist could ever have expected, but they think you're saying that you alone, you person, you must go and fix the pothole. No, what we've said does not work without organization. You need to be organized as a community. That is the only way this works. Individuals can put solar panels on their roofs, they can kind of have a borehole and so on, and that helps. But ultimately, you're still part of the kind of cascade into the collapse. So you need to organize with your community, and things become very cheap then. If your community has made the mental leap that we're talking about, 50 million rand divided by a big suburb of 30,000 people is 1,600 rand each. 50 million rand. You've now replaced a big transformer or something at a power station just for 1,600 rand from 30,000 individuals. You need the organization. You need to be organized as a community. You need scale ultimately. So no, when we say community, we have to kind of start doing these things ourselves. We're not saying you as an individual who is a ratepayer in good standing must now kind of take the community on your shoulders and carry it alone. It's never going to work. So you have to organize, you have to form institutions like Solidarity, like AfriForum, there's a group in Randburg now that's doing this.
Reimagine Randburg.
Reimagine Randburg, yeah. And there's various initiatives like this. It's just not happening at a big enough scale because too many people still harbor this fantasy that some politician or official on a white horse in shining armor is coming. We just can't see him yet, but he's coming. Banish the thought, perish the thought. It's not going to happen. You're really undermining yourself and your family and your community by having this fantasy in your mind. So yeah, I just wanted to add those two things. Thanks.
Yeah, no, I think Martin, you're 100% right, and I think that's and I mean, I do have sympathy for people. I mean, it's those should be things you should be able to just go to your local government official, to your ward councillor, and you should just be able to say, hey, here's an issue, and they should fix it. So that is how things should work. But unfortunately, it's not how things do work. And like we've said for most of the discussion, there's how you'd like things to work, and then there's the reality. And I mean, whether that's true whether on a local level, on a national level, and on an international level. But David, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah. So look, I think one of the examples that I often give is around fiber internet. I'm sure some of us today on this call are using fiber internet. That is a sophisticated infrastructure. That's something you need. It actually requires a lot of physical construction. Like you literally have to go and lay the fiber cables in your suburb, which has happened over the last few years in South Africa. And we pay for it. There's competition around service providers. Not all areas necessarily get it. But, when we're talking about something like water reticulation or electricity, people say, oh, only the state could serve this function. That's not the case. So yes, I mean, I share your sympathy with people who are frustrated. They're paying already. They're getting double taxed in a way. But I think we can move towards some of these scalable solutions, and there are precedents for this. So I think we should really be thinking creatively about it. And yeah, I think devolution, decentralization is very important, but so is privatization. We can have profit-seeking entities taking the initiative and also generating income for themselves. But yeah, I mean, just another example is the James and Ethel Gray Park in Melrose. That is private capital has taken over the running of the park. They've improved security and lighting, and there's a lot of activity going on there now. And that's a safe space that people can enjoy, and it's open to the public. But there is discretion of, who comes in and out and so on. So, there are trade-offs that are being made there. And somebody's obviously bearing that cost. But if you value these things, you can also donate to support an initiative like that. So, yeah, so I think there are a lot of examples that are arising, and ultimately, yes, you don't want to be double taxed, but you want to be moving to a situation where you pay, but you also control and have authority, like I said earlier.
And where you actually have the service itself. I mean, that's the most fundamental thing. But yeah, I think that, I mean, those arguments that it's only the government can align its interests in such a way that they're able to render the service. I mean, that's sort of belied by the fact that if it is the case that no private entity would be willing to do it, then why is it that you ban them from doing it? It's like similar with electricity, similar with almost any service. If it is the case that there's no incentive for the private sector, then there shouldn't be any reason to forbid the private sector. And I think that's really the main argument here. Is just that it's not so much the case that it has to be one or the other, but at least allow both to operate simultaneously. And at the end of the day, whoever is better will win. Any last words from any of our panelists? Okay, gentlemen,
Nope.
Thank you very much. Viewers,
Ending with a whimper rather than a bang.
Wow, yes, indeed. This, as is appropriate for the country that we live in. But, well, yeah, whimper is best case scenario in the South African context.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is the rational standard. We always end with a bang.
Oh, wow. If you've got a bang handy, go for it, David.
I do not actually.
Okay. That is the bang. The bang is that we've solved the problems. It now just remains for it to happen.
Mic drop. Business done.
Yeah, there you go. Everyone take a break over the long weekend. Next week we start building all of those solutions and solving every issue in South Africa.
Until the next raft of public holidays impacts on our productivity again.
Yes, well, I mean, you can't expect too much.
We can only do our best.
And as always, thanks David, thanks Comrade van Staden, and thanks to all the viewers. Drive safe over the weekend. Try to avoid those Grand Canyon-like potholes on the road, and we'll see you all again next week in our regularly scheduled Friday slot. Bye.
Cheers, guys.